My name is Jenny and welcome to my channel. I'm a Canadian knitter living in the absolutely beautiful northeast of England. Today I have two finished objects and two works in progress, all by coincidence free patterns. I didn't plan it that way, but I realized this morning that that's how it worked. So four free patterns in varying degrees of finishedness to present to you, as well as some pretty nerdy literary knitting crossover talk. So if that's the kind of thing that makes you nerdy happy the way it makes me nerdy happy, I hope you'll join me. And here we go! Hello, this is Jenny, editing Jenny from the future, or Jenny from the future who has just been editing, and this video has become unwieldy and just indulgently long, so I've decided to divide it into two pieces. So this video, the one that you're already watching, will include chat about the two vests and the two hats, but I'm going to share the particular literary nerdiness to another video to be uploaded not too long afterwards. So I hope that's not too inconvenient for you and that the length of the videos makes a little bit more sense, is a bit more manageable, and thanks again so much for watching. The four knitting objects that I have to present to you today are in varying degrees of being finished. But because I have two vests and two hats, I thought that I would divide them by those categories rather than by whether they're finished or not, because I think I learned quite a bit by, especially knitting the two vests kind of quite close together, one after the other. The hats are hats that I've knit several times. They're hats that I turn to when I want to gift knit for people. So they're patterns that I'm comfortable with and that I thought I would share with you because I'm really happy with them. And you know, every time I knit them, I feel like I get more comfortable with the pattern and more comfortable trying out new techniques. So if we start with the vests, the object that I'll start with first is one that's been done the longest. This was done before the holidays, before Christmas. I made it for my partner so that he could wear it over the Christmas holidays, and it is the pattern name is tricky. It's Adult Knit V-Neck Vest by Yarnspirations Design Studio. It's not the catchiest title in the whole world, but it is a very good pattern. It was a very solid pattern. So this is the finished vest. It's knit in Cascade 220, the colorway Shire, which he picked. The vest was not a surprise because I just wasn't brave enough to knit him something this is the first garment that I've ever finished for him. I definitely wasn't brave enough to knit him a garment for the first time without being able to try it on. It's also knit bottom up, and that was quite scary for me. So it was imperative that he was going to be able to try it on. It was not going to be a surprise, so I asked him to pick the color, and we went with Cascade 220 because I know from experience that it's a fairly soft wool. My partner has quite bad eczema, and so really didn't want anything that could be itchy next to his skin. I usually knit for him in acrylic, but I do prefer to knit garments in wool if I can. I just find it nicer on my hands because of the elasticity and the feel. That's my personal preference. So we decided to try it, and he's been very happy with the wool. He finds it soft, it doesn't irritate his skin. It helps that it's also a vest, so it very rarely touches his skin. But all of that to say, I asked him to choose the color. He was looking at blues, he saw the word Shire, I had suggested green could be good as well, and we went with Shire in honor of the Lord of the Rings, which he happens to be rereading. So that is the vest that I knit for him. It's been a big success. I actually, I feel a bit mean. He was actually wearing it today. He's working from home and he was wearing it today. I'm spoiled rotten. What better gift is there for a knitter than to make a garment for someone and have them wear it all the time? He wears it 2 or 3 times a week. It's one of his new favorites. He's already asking for it in different colors in future years. So I'm tickled. I'm really delighted. But he was wearing it today, and luckily he's working from home. It would have been tricky. I had planned to film today, but I hadn't discussed that with him. It didn't really occur to me that he might wear it on the day, so I'm lucky he wasn't in the office today because I was able to go and hand him a different sweater and ask for this one so that I could show it to you. But it's holding up really amazingly well. It does have a little tiny bit of pilling. Maybe I can show you. A bit of pilling, but honestly not enough to bother me, definitely not enough to bother him. He's less picky about that stuff even than I am. And otherwise, I mean, for a fairly soft wool, it's holding up really well, I think. The pilling is not noticeable when it's on him, and otherwise it's keeping its shape beautifully, it's keeping its integrity really beautifully, so I'm very pleased. To walk you through the modifications that I made really quickly, because this was a sweater that was designed to be knit entirely in pieces and then seamed together. My preference is to knit in the round when I can, so I did knit, I kept it bottom up because I'd never knit a vest before, and there were various sections where you were doing increases for a certain number of centimeters or inches, and then doing a different set of increases for a certain number of centimeters or inches, and my partner is quite tall. Okay, sorry about that. Someone came to the door. I collected a package for the neighbors, and I've completely forgotten where I was. But I think I was talking about modifications. So I did knit this in the round, even though it was designed to be knit in pieces. Oh yes, that's what I was saying. I was keeping it bottom up because I've never knit a vest before, and I knew that I was going to have to change some of the length dimensions. And I thought that that would be easier to do as I was working through the pattern as it was written, versus, you know, I've turned bottom up sweaters for myself into top down sweaters for myself before, but I know my own dimensions quite well, and I have lots of other sweaters to compare it to and things like that, and they were patterns that I was pretty familiar with, or types of patterns that I was pretty familiar with. Since this was both bottom up and knit in pieces, and I've never knit a vest, and it's for my partner whom I've never knitted a complete garment for before, I thought that I would minimize the number of alterations, minimize the number of kind of different angles that I was coming at this from. So I did go bottom up, which is not generally my preference, but it honestly worked out all right. I did try it on him, and I had a vest of his that is store-bought, that he really loves, that he wears all the time. So I was able to measure against that and knew that it would work out. So that helped a lot. Beyond the modification of knitting it in the round, I did, oh, and now I'm seeing much more bobbles as I pull this out, so is the other side just as bad? It's never embarrassing until you're about to show some other knitters up close. But there are definitely some pills here, but I put in a faux seam on the side. I actually did this to both of the vests that I've knit, and I did this to kind of replace some of that structure that you get from knitting something in pieces and then seaming it together. Obviously this is not as much structure, but I thought that it would be better than nothing. I also did this to prevent any skewing, any kind of bias tilt that a stockinette body can get. I don't think I would have had a problem with this one at all. In the other vest, it's much more crucial, I think, that I did that. But I also just thought that this would lend a nice detail, and because, I'll show you again, I did a 3-stitch repeat for this. So I did purl, knit, purl on the side, and the other advantage of that, I thought, and I think that it has worked out this way, is that it gives you a bit of that rib stretch, and so it snugs in a little bit if he's wearing quite a thin shirt underneath and he has a bit more room, but also then if he's wearing, sometimes he'll wear a thicker flannel shirt underneath if it's a cool day, and then if he needs a bit more room, it will stretch out and then you can see the detail really nicely. So I think that it did help with fit a little bit. Beyond that, I didn't make any modifications. I did have to change the way that I was knitting the ribbing on both the sleeves and the neckline, because those were designed to be knit flat as well, and then you would seam up at the end. I really didn't want to do that, so I watched some YouTube videos, figured out how to knit this in the round. I think it worked out really well. I'm quite happy with it. I did a bind off where, because it's a 2x2 rib, I did a bind off where you swap it over to be a 1x1 rib first and then did a sewn Italian bind off. I feel like you can kind of tell that it's done the switch from 2x2 to 1x1, but it still looks neater than binding off in pattern, and I just didn't have the energy. I was in crunch time to get this done before the holidays, to figure out a sewn 2x2 bind off, though that is definitely something that's on my list. I would like to learn to do that in the next little while. I'm struggling even to see where it was now, which is always a good sign, isn't it? But I did make a mistake in the ribbing where there's a stitch that is supposed to be a knit and is actually a purl. And it's one of those things, I honestly can't find it. It's one of those things that was bothering me so much when I found it. I found it after I had bound off. I was doing it late at night. I was watching TV. I was a little bit frustrated because I'd had to pull out the ribbing once before because I misread the instructions. I was definitely a bit confused going between a flat ribbing section and the ribbing section in the round with the thing that was tripping me up. The sleeves were fine. The thing that was tripping me up was the V-neck, going between the instructions for flat and the instructions for round that I was finding online. And I was just a bit distracted, and a stitch that should have been a purl was a knit, or a stitch that should have been a knit was a purl. I honestly can't remember which way it was now. And as is almost always the case, I think, I was beating myself up about it at the time, and I considered ripping the whole thing out. My partner came in, very good timing right at that moment, and was like, "Why are you frustrated with this?" And I showed him, and he couldn't tell. Even with my finger pointing directly at the stitch, he just couldn't tell and didn't care. So he convinced me not to pull it out. I thought that I might go back after the holidays, after he had a chance to wear it to the dinners that he wanted to wear it to with his family. But after the holidays were over, I didn't care anymore. He never cared, and now I still care a little bit, but I can't find it. Maybe you can find it. Anyways, I feel like it's always good for me to be reminded about these cases where things do bother me, and then with a bit of time, I don't care and often can't even notice it, because I think that happens to me all the time. I'm a perfectionist while I'm doing it, but actually one stitch out of place is pretty small peanuts, and with a bit of perspective, I can really tell that it's small peanuts. So all in all, very happy with this. I think that I would make it just a little bit longer next time. It's a good length for him, and I did measure it on him, but with blocking, things always change just a little bit differently than you expect. I feel like swatches are such a good guideline, and they give you good information, but they're never perfect, at least for me. They're never completely spot on, and my math is never completely spot on either for the way that my row gauge differs from pattern row gauge. So I would do it maybe just a centimeter or two longer, but otherwise, it's a good pattern. It was free. I'm happy with it. He's very happy with it, and I think I will be knitting it again. He likes repeat patterns. I'll talk about that more in a minute. He really likes repeat patterns, so I think that I will be knitting this exact pattern again probably next year. So that is the adult V-neck vest in Cascade 220. So vest number 2 is so far less of a success story. It's not a catastrophe, but it's less of a success story. And the reason that it is less of a success story, and I'm realizing as I'm pulling this over that I forgot to make a very clear note about what the colorway is and what the yarn is. So I will have to look that up. But this is the See My Vest Chunky by Emily Bolduan, possibly, who runs a yarn shop, a local yarn shop in Australia, and releases, I think all of her patterns are free, releases free patterns to go along with her shop. And I have to say, I'm not thrilled with this vest, but I'm not thrilled with my version of this vest. I think that the pattern is excellent. It's written very, very clearly, and her patterns, as far as I interpret them, seem to be written with a beginner in mind, and written so that a beginner can try new techniques and not find them too intimidating, and I think that they're very successful in that. So I would definitely recommend the pattern, even if I'm not entirely happy with the vest. So I've knitted this, and it's almost done. I've done the ribbing here and the ribbing here. It's bound off at the bottom. All that I haven't done is the sleeve over here. So I'll give you some of the specs and kind of run you through the pattern a little bit first, and my modifications, and then I'll explain why I'm not entirely happy with it. So this is knit with Rowan Colourscape, which is a a single ply bulky weight yarn. It's been discontinued, Rowan doesn't make it anymore, and I bought this yarn at a charity shop. It is one of my most serendipitous yarn purchases. I think I got 4 skeins of it, 400-gram skeins for something like £6. I've never been that lucky before. I was very, very excited, and it just worked out really beautifully. I've made a couple of hats and various other things, and the colors are colors that I love. But this has been sitting in my stash for quite a while for a few reasons. First, I don't use bulky weight yarn very often, and single ply bulky weight yarn I've been very nervous to use, actually. After the initial excitement, I realized that this is the kind of yarn that could pill quite badly and doesn't necessarily have the kind of durability that you would need for a sweater, say. I think it will just pill, it won't hold up terribly well, even though Rowan are really good quality yarns, generally. The other thing is that it is a variegated yarn. And I always really love variegated yarns in the skein. I think that they're beautiful. But when they knit up, I'm just a bit, I'm never quite as happy with them knit up as I am with them in the skein. And I often end up a bit disappointed, which is in part really what's happened here. But I do love all of the colors in this. And so I thought that I would make a vest because I'd made one for Lewis and I'd really enjoyed it. And as I was knitting it for him, I was thinking about all the ways he wears vests quite often. He always has. And he wears vests regardless of whether they're trendy or not. But now that vests are starting to be trendy again, I've never been a vest person. I've never owned a vest, I don't think. Even as a child, I never owned a vest, even though I think that they were popular for children when I was young. But anyways, knitting him the vest was making me think about vests in general and making me think that this could be really fun with just like a t-shirt and jeans in those in-between seasons. I think that I could get a lot of wear out of this. I think that when I eventually finish it, I just need to get over myself and finish it, then I will get a lot of wear out of it. So, vest, I think, good decision for this yarn. I am excited about the vest in this yarn. Modifications that I made to this. This is a top-down vest knit in the round, so I didn't need to make any modifications that way. It did not, however, include short rows, and short rows are really kind of something that are non-negotiable for me now. They just make things much more comfortable. I really don't like things pulling at my neck. So I added in some short rows on the back. I just knit back and forth. I think I did 2 sets of back and forth, so 4 rows total of short rows, because it is such a bulky weight yarn. I have tried this on. I think that the short rows really do their job. They help. And I'm quite happy with how that turned out. Because it is a variegated yarn, I didn't want to do too much color management. I think that's one of the other things about variegated yarns is I'm just not patient enough to really think through how the colors are going to work. I've even heard other knitters talking about, cutting the yarn and rearranging it so that they get exactly the color progression that they want. That is not part of an enjoyable knitting experience for me. So instead of doing too much color management, what I did was I did 2 alternating rows from different skeins, from 2 different skeins at a time. I did have kind of 2.5 skeins left, and so I swapped out skein number 1 for skein number 3 when it finished, but essentially I was always alternating between 2 different skeins and the 2 rows. And I think that that is both very successful and one of my first issues with this vest. I wish that I had gone 3 or 4 rows for the stripes. I think the stripes are a bit narrower than I was picturing them to be, which is just a very silly mistake. And if I had realized really early on, it would have been very easy to fix. But I didn't really notice that that's how I felt about it until I was done the body. And it's not worth going back at this point. And also, even as I say this, I've been letting this sit for a few weeks and the two row thick stripes are growing on me. So not too big an issue. On the sides, I did the same as I did with the vest for my partner. I put in a kind of faux seam. In this case, I just did 2 purls next to each other. And the reason that I did that was because I used the seam to hide. I was doing helical knitting occasionally, where you knit into the stitch below when you come to the row change, since you're actually knitting in a spiral rather than stripes. That's a very fast, terrible explanation. But basically, to avoid that color jog between rows, I was doing helical knitting, but knitting into the row below in a chunky weight yarn, I learned, is not the same as knitting into the row below in a fingering weight yarn or even in a DK weight yarn. It was really giving a texture change. It was making that part of the fabric really, really thick, and it was pulling visibly. Just because the stitches are so big, there's the scale means that there's less room for error. So I wasn't enjoying that, and I realized that it's more important to me that the fabric lie nicely than that you be able to tell that I was using 2 different yarns. So I decided not to knit to do helical knitting. Not sure how that works grammatically. Anyways, I decided not to do that, and so I did 2 purls next to each other, because then I hid the jog in that purl seam. And I think that that works really well. I think it's really not very noticeable, so I'm pleased with that. This is also the type of yarn where it was definitely, I think that bias shift in knitting can also have to do with the way that you knit, whether you are putting twist in or taking twist out with the way that you knit, and I am definitely putting twist in. It was very clear to me that this was going to do a bit of bias shifting, twisting in the torso if I didn't do something to counter that. And the seams, again, have worked really well. So seams, in both cases, big thumbs up. I'm very happy with that. I think it worked well, and I would definitely do that again. Those were my 2 only modifications here, the short rows and the seams. Otherwise, it went really well. The pattern is beautiful. I'm lying, I did one other modification, I'm realizing. My other final modification was, and let me show it to you here, that I moved the increases 1 stitch deeper into the body of the sweater on both the sleeve side and on the neck side. The pattern had been written so that those increases would be hidden when you then went and picked up stitches to finish with the ribbing in those 3 sections. And I really like those increases. I think that the kind of line of those increases around the neckline and around the arm's high are really interesting and subtle. So I decided that I wanted those to show, and I moved them 1 stitch deeper into those 3 locations so that then when I picked up stitches, you can still see them. So those were my 3 modifications. Really happy with all of them, really happy with the pattern. Even the stripes are growing on me. The reason that this has been sitting now for a couple of weeks is because I then did decide to do color management up at the top. And it's amazing how our opinions of these things change, isn't it? Because I decided I didn't do color management anywhere. I did stripes all the way through. When I got to the bottom ribbing, I decided to stop doing stripes. I just used one yarn continuously there, 1 thread continuously there, and that worked really well at the bottom. And sorry, I'm noticing all sorts of fluff. It's that single ply bulky weight yarn just attracts all the fluff in your house. So I'm noticing fluff as I'm talking to you. But despite being fluffy, the ribbing in a single color worked really well. It was a part of the yarn that was changing quite quickly, and so I don't think you can even tell in a continuous line that I go from stripes to 1 yarn down here. I think it varies enough that that's not totally obvious. The top ribbing, though, I was more nervous about, and I was very aware that, you know, if one arm's high was really light and the neck and the other arm were very dark, that would look unbalanced. And I had, in the yarn that I had left when I came to do this section, I had a lot of the pink left. And so I decided that maybe I would do color management and make all 3 top ribbing sections in this pink. And I do still have enough pink to do that, but I don't know. I wasn't totally convinced that I wanted all 3 to be the same when I got there. And I was wondering if maybe I wanted the neck to be pink, and I have enough that I could probably do the 2 arm size in blue. And I just started to overthink that a little bit, and as I'm holding it up to you now, I'm realizing that really either one would probably work, and then I could just start wearing it. So I don't know. I don't know if I'll show this to you again. Maybe if I get it finished in the next little while, I will show you what I decide to do with that. In some ways, though, I don't know if you have this. In some ways, the projects that I struggle with a little bit along the way and that I'm not over the moon in love with end up being the sweaters or garments that I wear the most. And I think that some of that is my Puritan upbringing. I definitely, in a garment that I really love, I can spend, the whole day nervous that I'm gonna snag it, or, not wanting to brush my arms against my sides to prevent any wear and tear on the fabric, whereas something that I'm not as in love with, that I feel like isn't quite as precious, I can sometimes just be a bit more comfortable in and wear a bit more often and just not worry about it if it's getting worn, which really is how we should treat all of our knits, I think. They're designed to be worn, they're not designed to be precious. So all of that to say, even as I present this to you now with a bit of a break, having put it aside for kind of 2 weeks, I'm liking it more than I did when I was still working on it and overthinking it. And I think that once I get it done, I will wear it a ton. And possibly rhyme all the time. Oh my god, that wasn't on purpose, but it was pretty funny. So I will come back to this. I will get it done. I might still give myself a bit more time off because I'm not itching to work on it, but all in all, not a terrible project. Okay, so moving on to hats. As with the vests, I have 2 hats to show you. As with the vests, they are both free patterns available on Ravelry, and these 2 hat patterns, I must have knit each of them about half a dozen times, because they're free, but also because they're really solid patterns that I think appeal to a lot of different people, work really well in lots of different colors, work really well. I've knit them in acrylic, I've knit them in superwash, I've knit them in non-superwash. These are both kind of go-to hats for me when I'm gift knitting. So lots of people in my life have either a Bankhead hat or an Antler Toque. But the Antler Toque that I knit this time is for me, actually. This is the second Antler Toque that I'm knitting for myself, and the first was also green. I actually have it here. I knit this several years ago, and it's been one of my go-to hats ever since. I'm afraid I don't remember what yarn this was originally, but I know that it was 80% acrylic, 20% wool, and I'm pretty diligent about always hand washing my knits, but I have to admit that this hat, this winter, I dropped this hat. I was rummaging in my backpack, and it was in my backpack, and it fell in some mud. Not horrendously, but it fell in some dirt, and it's been a very wet winter. There was some mud on this hat, and we came home, and I was exhausted, and we were putting on a load of laundry anyways, and because it's 80% acrylic, I thought, I'm just overly precious. Acrylic can always be washed. The 20% wool is probably superwash anyways. It's probably not a big deal. I'll toss it in the washing machine. And it felt it. It didn't felt badly. It didn't felt badly enough that it doesn't fit or anything like that. It's really only select places. Let me see if I can show you. It's just kind of at the top of the hat. Oh, it's not showing up right. So it just felt it a little bit. Really what it is just there isn't very much stitch definition on, especially the top of the antler motif anymore. And, this hat doesn't owe me anything. I have worn this hat, multiple times a week between the months of October and April for years now, and it doesn't owe me anything. So I'm also not going to get rid of it. I'm still going to wear this hat, but I thought, for days when I'm not just walking on my own, when I'm going to meet people, when I'm going into town, maybe I deserve a non-felted version. So I had 2 balls left over actually, and I will come back to this because it's funny. But I have 2 balls left over. I had 2 balls left over of the Cascade 220 Shire after knitting the vest for Lewis, and I thought, you know, this hat will also be a lot warmer in a 100% wool, and non-superwash is my preference. So I feel a bit spoiled knitting the same hat in a very similar, in a green. I mean, it's a very different green, but also a green. But I'm so pleased, and I think that this will get probably even more wear than the other, because I do have a kind of gradation of warmth of hats. That part of my Canadian identity is still strong with me. You know, you need a cool weather hat, a colder weather hat, a really cold weather hat, a really, really cold weather hat. So this will be a kind of second level cool weather hat for me because it is 100% non-superwash wool. It's still only 1 thickness, so I still need to be able to scale up from there, but I love it. Changes that I made from this hat, you can probably tell, I made this one longer. It's always, I made this hat exactly to the smaller adult size dimensions, and it's always driven me a little bit nuts how short the ribbing is, because when I fold the ribbing up, it ends up being right at the pattern break, because I like a thicker ribbing, and that's where it wants to fold. That's the easiest place for the fabric to fold. So you end up kind of getting this puckering of the start of the pattern showing on the inside. I didn't love that, and also it doesn't pull down as far over my ears as I would like. That's one of the reasons that this is my lowest level warmth hat. So I made this one longer. I also knit it at the larger adult size because my gauge with this yarn was slightly smaller than that of the pattern. That doesn't bother me. In fact, I really like a tighter gauge for a hat. That means it's going to be warmer. But I then didn't want it to be too snug kind of width-wise, so I did the largest size. I did 8 repeats of the pattern instead of 9. I don't mind being that detailed with you because this is a free pattern. You're welcome to go and look the pattern up yourself. At the largest size, the adult large asks for 9 repeats before you start decreasing. I did 4 inches of ribbing instead of 2.5, so I reduced the number of repeats to 8, and all in all still ended up with a much longer hat than what the pattern called for, but one that I think is gonna fit really nicely. I haven't actually worn it yet. It's just finished blocking, but I'm gonna go for a walk later today, and I think I will take this with me, and I will try to post some pictures to show you all. I'll share some pictures here when I eventually get around to taking some pictures in this one, because I'm very excited about it. So, Antler Toque. Is there anything else worth saying about this? This was the first, when I knit this hat the first time, it was the first time I had ever done cables. I messed up a lot. Unlike with the vest, when I was looking at this pattern, looking at this hat for the first time really seriously again. I mean, I wear it all the time, but I was really looking at it to count how many repeats I'd done and things like that. There are definitely some cables that go in the wrong direction here. Let me see if I can find one for you. Or just cables that are a bit funny. Like, I'm not sure what I did here, but I did something. Can you see the way that it breaks here? Something went wrong there. But it's hidden by the ribbing, so I never even noticed it. But there are a few things like that. And I definitely remember, as I was knitting this, getting, you know, 5 centimeters away from a row and then noticing that I'd done a cable in the wrong direction. And I did drop those stitches back, flip them so that the cable worked in the right direction, and pull the stitches up again. It's one of the first times that I ever did anything that extreme in terms of fixing my own mistakes. And in that way, I remember this hat as a really, really good learning experience. I learned a lot making this hat the first time. It's not perfect, but I learned so much about cables. This time, I've done much more cable work since then. I didn't make any mistakes with the way that the cables were angled. I think I'm just a bit more comfortable doing them in both directions. So, I didn't default to one or the other when I got tired, which I think is part of the key for me at least. I also did, I did this without a cable needle. I just pinched and used my active needles to put the stitches in front or behind. There are lots of videos on YouTube about how to do this. I watched a couple and that's what I did. I think that that worked really well for, these cables are all 4 stitch repeats, so you're moving 2 in front of the work or 2 behind the work each time. I don't think it would work for anything more than that, at least not for me. I think I would find it too difficult to do anything more than that. And then the torque that you're putting on your hands would be really difficult, I think. That would hurt my hands, certainly. I don't think it would work with acrylic or with superwash wool, or at least I would find it really stressful. The nice thing about this was that, you know, all of the instructions say to pinch those stitches before you take them off the needle, and then you're picking them up with the other needle in the opposite direction. I was pinching, but because this is a non-superwash wool, if I didn't pinch or if I let go accidentally or, you know, something like that, the stitches just stayed there anyways, just kind of waiting to be picked up. So in this case, I think that that worked really well. I'm definitely not saying that that's, you know, I feel like there's almost a bit of pressure sometimes to do the new technique to the exclusion of the old way of doing things. I definitely don't think that cable needles are losing their usefulness. But in this case, it just meant that I had to carry around one less thing when I was working on this hat. So that was quite nice, and I was very happy with it. So that is my Antler Toque. The next hat is a work in progress. This is my Bankhead, and the Bankhead is by Susie Gourlay or Gourlay. I'm not sure how you say her name, I apologize. But this is another pattern that I just love, and I have knit it many, many, many times. I think that this is a pattern, I really like this pattern for men, or I have knit it for a few men in my life and they have given me positive feedback, and therefore this has become a default pattern that I knit for men in my life. I knit this one first probably 5 or 6 years ago for my partner. It's one of the first things that I knit for him, and he still wears that hat. He's very knitworthy. He's very knitworthy. He still wears that hat all the time. So this is the first ever Bankhead hat that I made. Yeah, he wears it a ton. It's this is 100% acrylic, which works really well for him. He can be quite sensitive on his ears with his eczema, so he requested 100% acrylic, and it has definitely started to show some wear. I don't know if you can see, it's pilling a little bit, and the ribbing especially feels quite loose to me. Like, I think it just doesn't have the memory that wool has, does it? So it's quite a bit looser than when I originally knit it, and it is pilling a little bit. But considering this is his go-to hat, and it has been his go-to hat for 5 or 6 years, I mean, you just can't complain, can you? That's held up really well. So that was the first one that I ever knit. I bought the acrylic that I made this out of. I had a 400-gram ball, so I made I made several red Bankhead hats for people in Canada and for people in the UK. And one of the other people I made one for was my father-in-law, Lewis's father. And this summer, he requested that I make him another one, but bigger. He finds that the hat is just a bit snug, but he said he loves the pattern, he likes the pattern, don't change the pattern, and he likes the wool, don't change the wool. But I didn't have any more of that wool left. So what I am making for him now is a Bankhead in as close a color as I could get. I couldn't find that acrylic is, I'm not even sure what brand it was. I did some searching, I couldn't find it. And since I was buying some Cascade 220 anyways, and I bought it on sale, I bought it from Craftsy, I believe, while there was a sale on. So when I bought the Shire, I also bought this color, which I believe is called Bright Red, but I will double check and put that in the description. It's not exactly the same red, but I think it's close enough. And I'm knitting this quite a bit larger. So again, this is a free pattern, so I feel a bit more comfortable talking about specific stitch counts, but I couldn't remember. One thing is, because I knit this hat so often, I don't make individual Ravelry pages for them. Just that seems like an administrative step that isn't terribly necessary until until someone asks for one a different size. And I can't remember exactly So the difference in sizes in this hat are 10 stitch intervals. So there is an adult size that you cast on 100 stitches and an adult size where you cast on 110. And I definitely would have knit one of those for my father-in-law, but I can't remember exactly which one I did. I know I did 100 for my partner. I feel like I probably would have done 110 for my father-in-law because he told me that he has a big head. I don't think but I think he likes to wear his hat. It's a bit looser, and his head is definitely a little bit bigger than Lewis's. So I decided to cast on 120 for him this time, and the yarn has a bit more starch because it is a wool, so I think that that will give him a bit more room as well, and I'm hoping that that will fit him comfortably. So that is what I'm doing for him there. I don't think I've made any modifications to this pattern at all. It's pretty straightforward. It's a really fun knit because there are purls on every other row, but alternating rows are just full knit rounds, and so, you know, it goes quite quickly. It's got good momentum. This is a great put in a bag and bring with you on public transit kind of knit, or knit in front of TV. So very happy with that. And that is my fourth object, my fourth free pattern. One thing that I did forget to mention is that as I was knitting this hat for myself and then started knitting the Bankhead for Lewis's dad, he looked over at me on the couch and said, "Could I have a green Bankhead?" And I tried to nudge him towards a different pattern because I am just knitting a Bankhead. I'm not sure that I want to knit this yarn again and that pattern again immediately. But he likes what he likes, and he doesn't like to vary from what he likes. So I think that I will be knitting a green Bankhead soon. I may or may not share that with you because it starts to get repetitive with the same yarn and the same pattern. But if you needed any more evidence of the Bankhead being a pattern that is comfortable to wear, I don't think I'll ever be able to knit Lewis any other hat pattern because he's found what he likes. So I will leave you there. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to me ramble. I hope that you have a really wonderful rest of the day, and until soon.